Welcome, everyone. Very grateful to have you all joining us for our Lunch and Learn on conversion, quote unquote, therapy practices. We are very grateful to have Ian Easter, who is here to share first voice reflection on unlearning bias. And thank you, Ian, for sharing some of your story with us. But first, we want to begin with a land acknowledgement. I invite you to join with me in the chat and acknowledge the name of where you are located. In the bottom right, you will see placenames.mapdev.ca, or you can just go to Google. But we like placenames.mapdev.ca because it is an interactive map that teaches you how to pronounce correctly the name of where you are located before it was renamed by colonial settlers. So I invite you to join with me. And before we even begin, to just take a moment and close your eyes and feel gratitude and connection to the land. Perhaps there's a thought where you are located. Maybe it's the beach, maybe it's your garden, maybe it is your hiking trail, maybe it's somewhere else. But if there's a place where you feel especially connected to the land, I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and feel gratitude for that land where you feel connected. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking from Unama'ki, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties that were signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act in 1982, and they remain active to this day. Let us take this time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers commits to translating this acknowledgement into action by seeking to implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, especially those regarding education. We commit to doing what we can to becoming better treaty partners. We commit to learning and to unlearning. So let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. May our session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. When we acknowledge the land, we must also begin to acknowledge the wisdom of this planet and align ourselves with its truths. We are all treaty people. So how does this impact what we do and how we do it? And how will it guide our work together today? Decolonizing ourselves and our practice means recognizing the ways in which we are each impacted by the colonial system in which we all participate, and from which those of us of settler descent continue to benefit. Each of us, depending upon our social location and intersectional positionality, are uniquely impacted or oppressed. For example, those of us from African descent were dispossessed and uprooted from their land and brought to Turtle Island against their will as part of the white supremacy and slave trade that fueled the settlement of this continent. We take this moment to reflect upon the unique impact of colonization upon each of us and upon our practice. We take this moment to reflect upon where we each are in our own positionality. So, for example, those people who have certain parts of their identity that are in the center. For example, if I identify as white, then I should be privileging people's voices that are more on the margins because I don't know what it's like to be Black, brown, Indigenous, or Asian, for example. However, if, for example, I identify here, I would want a privilege there, but if I identify here, for example, then I would want to receive support for the ways in which I am experiencing trauma by living in a colonial world where my identity is marginalized. So learning to listen to the voices of those people who are on the first voices and margins is part of how we begin to decolonize ourselves. And that is a central part of today's lesson, today's professional development lunch and learn, where we are going to be having a first voice account, because it's important for those of us that are practitioners, that are social workers, that have power because of our profession and education, to hear upon the impact of the ways in which we may unintentionally cause harm. And so learning from people who've experienced harm is one way that we can begin to learn how to better help and support them. This is part of our new code of ethics that we are grateful that the Canadian Association of Social Workers has begun to launch. And we are committed to using our professional development to both learn new ways of thinking and understanding the work we do, and to unlearn assumptions and bias so that we can ensure safer social work practice and a more just world for all people. We are grateful for the new Canadian Association of Social Work Code of Ethics that requires us to shift from the illusion of neutrality to actively becoming anti-racist and fighting against racism and all intersectional prejudice that is part of colonization. And so with that, we are grateful for today's lunch and learn that will help us achieve those goals as part of the conversion therapy practices. So just a little bit about that. This week is the 2-year anniversary of the passing of Bill C-4 to amend the criminal code that makes conversion therapy practices illegal in Canada. And the word therapy is either in quotation marks, or there's a star, or there's parentheses, because it is not therapy. It causes harm. It causes people to want to self-harm. And we are going to be learning a little bit more about that today. We're going to be learning about it from Ian. And this is a picture of Ian, who was featured in the legal information, in the guide by the Legal Information Society of Nova Scotia that was put out, and you can find it on their website. But it was put out specifically 2 years ago when the code, when it was made illegal to do conversion practices in Canada. They put out a guide to help people understand what it is. 2 years later, we're still trying to understand what it is because it's so pervasive. The criminal code defines conversion, quote unquote, therapy as a practice, treatment, or service designed to either change a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual, change a person's gender identity to cisgender, change a person's gender expression so that it conforms to the sex assigned to the person at birth, repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior, repress a person's non-cisgender gender identity, or repress or reduce a person's gender expression that does not conform to the sex assigned to the person at birth. And so that is what is defined in the criminal code. And this week, stopconversionpractices.ca was just launched, and it is part of the Canadian Research, CBRC, the Canadian Community-Based Research Center. And they launched this website, Stop Conversion Practices, that explains what conversion, quote unquote, therapy might look like and where it happens. And it has a ton of different resources for practitioners, service providers, family, friends, and survivors. So I just want to share with you a little bit more about it, but I hope it'll just inspire you after today to look it up, stopconversionpractices.ca. But it has lots of links and resources, and it's going to continue to be evolving. There are new guidelines for how to provide counseling. And we at the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, as we are working on our own clinical guidelines, have been working closely with the CBRC specifically to align our best practice clinical guidelines that we're working on with the ones that they are recommending. And it's important, there's also like a list of all of the different Canadian, American, and international professional organizations who oppose conversion practices. So it's really important for us to begin to understand all of this. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to introduce Ian, who's going to share more about himself and his story. So Ian, over to you. We are excited to learn from you, and you'll probably need to unmute. And with that, thank you all. Allow you.
Great. Thank you so much, Naj. It's wonderful to be with you all tonight or today. It's a little strange not seeing people, but I'll just keep prattering away. And I've said, feel free to ask any questions as you wish, and Naj will be monitoring the chat. So feel free to use that. I wanted to tell you a bit of my own story, largely with the aim of helping you understand kind of one of the contexts in which many conversion therapy survivors come from. And so I grew up in an evangelical a Baptist family. My grandfather was quite a well-known Baptist minister, and my parents were Baptist missionaries, and I, through the process of my life, became both a Baptist missionary and a Baptist minister. So I was working really hard to get my street cred as a good Baptist boy. One of the things I realized very early on, it's really one of my core memories, is that there was something wrong with me, and it wasn't good. It was bad. There was a lot of shame involved with it. This feeling of being unlovable, this feeling of being ultimately feeling like I had to hide this part of me. Obviously, that part of me was that I was gay, or in the language of the church, a homosexual. And in my context growing up, that was literally the worst of sins. Sure, there are lots of other sins but being or struggling with homosexuality in that context was an abnormality. It was viewed as something that God despised, and that he hated with a passion. And I remember being in one sermon where someone had the audacity to actually say that homosexuality made God so sick that he caused the plague of AIDS to destroy all the gays. And so in that context, I think you can understand that I made every effort in my power to hide that part of me. And I I knew, or I felt, I believed that if anyone found out my secret, I would be rejected. I would be hated. I would be kicked out of the church. That God would send me right to hell, um, and that God would hate me. And I still struggle with that, feeling that God does hate me. Because of the strength of that teaching when you grow up in a context where there's no we have words for homosexuality in the church. They talk about sexual brokenness to try to soften it up, I guess. But it still implies that you're broken. They talk about having same-sex attraction, which is a soft way of saying I'm not actually practicing gay sex. I'm not going out and hooking up with other guys, but I'm attracted to the same sex. But it still was something that I was desperate to fix and desperate. And there was no context in which you could be gay and still belong to the church or the community. And that's a really important factor to understand when you're dealing with any of your clients or patients who are coming from that background, is that sense that you can never accept yourself and remain within God's love and the community of believers. Many of us, that is just kind of the core of our understanding of God, and our understanding of the church is that, and community is that we can't be who we are. We have to hide that part of us. I engaged in, for me, conversion therapy wasn't just one event. It really was a lifetime of a long list of efforts that I went through to not be gay. I probably started around, I was a Baptist, so I got baptized later in life. And it really was something that I did because at the core, I was hoping that, I'd go under the water gay and come up straight. And I really believed that was at the core, was going to fix me, and it didn't. So I became a good Christian boy, and went to church and did all that thing. I spent countless hours praying the gay away. I went to many of the healing or miracle services, and I came forward to have the demons of homosexuality cast out of me. I read every single book I could find about ex-gay people in the church, Christians who had once in their life become gay, were practicing the gay lifestyle, but then eventually they were healed, and I was so desperate for that. I got involved with healing prayer, a form of Christian counseling that involves, most of the sessions you're in prayer and you're asking God to heal that broken part of you. I also became a missionary myself. I became a pastor, a minister, went to seminary, and eventually I married, and I had kids and a family. And really, in many ways, at the core, all of those were that desperate desire for God to fix what was so horribly wrong about me. My journey officially into conversion therapy started with reading a book by a woman named Leanne Payne, who became quite well known in a lot of the ex-gay circles. She wrote a book called The Broken Image about how God heals homosexuality through healing prayer. There was also a foundational book by an ex-gay man named Andy Comiskey, and he wrote a book called Pursuing Sexual Wholeness, And the subtitle was How God Heals the Homosexual. And Andy Comiskey ended up writing what became the program, the conversion therapy program that I entered when I was about 20 or so. No, 25. I was after I just gotten married, and I entered this program called Living Waters in BC. It was a 12-week discipleship program, but really what the core was was conversion therapy. It was most of the participants joined with some degree or level of queerness that they wanted to have healed and destroyed. And so the program itself evolved a lot of, it was basically as patterned evening started with worship, and then there was time to come forward and have prayer there. And then there was a lecture about some form of how God heals that gay part of you, or relationships, and how to pin the your sins on the cross. We did a lot of that. We did a lot of anointing with oil, and so varied practices. And then we break into small groups where it was often the humiliating process of having to confess every week to this group of other guys all your sexual sins. So that was pornography, any form of sexual attraction or lust, any and all same-sex encounters, sins of the flesh, and then you would have, you'd be prayed for. And I was very desperate at the time, desperate to be healed and desperate to have this work, and that's really what drove me to conversion therapy, was this sense that this program and this process would be the final. This would be the magic, trick. God would flip the switch and I'd suddenly be straight. But I soon realized that that it wasn't really working. And I think what was extremely difficult about that was I had already by that point perfected the act of being straight. I just put on the mask, and so here I was in this most vulnerable place, and I realized I'm not safe to be to be gay or to come out in this context. So I have to continue playing the role. One of the things about the program and the power of this program is that it really was the only recognized context for helping people become ex-gay or no longer gay, or for conversion therapy. And so that added to that desperation, like this had to work because this was the last resort. This was there was nothing else except for me just resuming the act and pretending that I wasn't gay anymore. That led me to probably the period of my life that I most regret and I have the most shame about, that I'm still working through, and that was that I ended up becoming part of the leadership assistant small group leader, and then I think I had 1 year where I led a group myself. And so I'm still unpacking the fact that in my own journey of conversion therapy, I perpetrated harm on others, victims and people who were desperate, and I essentially lied through that. I was a hypocrite. I acted like that God had healed me, and the truth was nothing had changed. But again, there's just this pull of wanting to be involved in something that there were so many leaders of this program who claimed that God had healed them. So that also created in me this dynamic of what's so wrong about me that other guys are being healed, um, that other people are being healed, and yet I still remained. So that was a lot to take in. Fortunately, that was really only a 2-year period of my life, and then I um, ended up going on to other jaunts. I became a minister in a couple of different locations, and actually in Europe for a little while. Then I came back and I joined the military. So that's um, that was kind of my involvement in conversion therapy. Really, the next, those that period between um, conversion therapy and me being kind of a minister, that was a period where I think I buried everything, and uh, but then in 2012, I was in the military, and my wife and I decided that our marriage was over. And before you jump to any conclusions, it wasn't actually based on the fact that I was gay. It had a lot of other complex issues, and was not something I wanted. I wanted to remain. I loved being married. I loved my kids. I loved having a family, and I loved being normal. I loved feeling like I could just try to bury that gay part of me. But that didn't happen. Now I can say fortunately, because we ended up separating, and found myself in Ottawa. I was at high risk at that point in my life. Everything really had come crashing down. I was quite suicidal, and decided to kind of check myself into the mental health clinic at the hospital in Ottawa, and I met a phenomenal social worker. Shout out to social workers who helped me essentially helped me come out. And a tremendous and powerful experience in my life to finally uh, receiving the type of therapy that I really needed. It wasn't conversion therapy; it was acceptance. It was learning to love that part of me that I had hated for so long, and to accept that part of me. And it started with that acceptance. And what kind of propelled me forward then was that I ended up meeting a man who is now my husband. But I knew that as soon as I married him, that all my fears, I'd have to face the music and really face my biggest fears in my life, which were obviously rejection and hatred. And that happened. I was excommunicated by the church, and a lot of my former, friends and a few family members and people really condemned me, expressed their hatred for me. I was told I was going to hell unless I repented, and it was a really unpleasant time in my life. But at the same time, it was a time when I was finally free. I was finally able to, I couldn't hide anymore. I was married to a man. I mean, there was nothing and it was great because I was in the context of the military where, it's like I was working with some fairly intense, units at the time. And, one of my fears was, oh, once they find out, they're gonna, destroy me. And not one. In fact, a number of the people that I respected the most and had served were really hard in the military, went out of their way to express their support and their love and encouragement. So that was very healing for me. And that was kind of my experience. I went from once Darren and I got married, I actually became a registered psychotherapist, and I was served in the military for about 5 or 6 years as a called the term a mental health chaplain. Um, and it was a wonderful opportunity. So I speak I speak the clinical language of therapy. So I wanted to kind of move on to um, ways and some things about treatment of conversion therapy survivors, and so some of the issues that I went through, or some of the advice I guess I would say for you in terms of working with these people, or this population of people, which I would harbor to say is a lot larger than we probably recognize, especially the number of queer people who have grown up in the church or have had some kind of experience of religion, and have that gone through the efforts to change their either their sexual orientation or their gender identity, or anything that the church deemed to be um, broken or sinful, which is really the basis of conversion therapy. One of the key areas of working with survivors is an area of self growth, which is to work through your own biases. There are a lot, and most of us have a reaction to the word Christianity or evangelical or the church, or even conversion therapy, and there needs to be an understanding of the distinction between our own bias, and often the people who come to us who were deeply embedded in that population, that community that grew up, and so we may have a reaction that says, Christianity it's a harmful religion. Like, why would anyone be a part of it? But that bias can become a barrier, because we need to appreciate that there are a lot of people who either by choice or by family, or were raised in that community, and for those growing up years, that was the center of their being. That was the core of their community experience and their cultural experience. And so there needs to be an appreciation of uh, of our own biases against either organized religion or the practices of conversion therapy, or the people who have engaged in that. We may have that unconscious bias that says, I can't believe that you would you would do that. Like, there's nothing wrong with you, and that's great to know. But within the religious context, there is definitely something wrong with you, like that you grow up with that feeling. So so work on your own biases. That would be the first thing I would say. The other thing is understand the importance of um, the unconscious, that repression within each survivor. Um, there is such a big part. You're dealing with the person who has spent their life hiding a part of their life, um, a part of themselves, living a lie, perfecting the art of acting a certain way, or denying, or in other words, repressing, carrying a secret that they protected, and that's a survival mechanism. That's something that's really, really crucial for them to be able to uh, to get through. Um, Obviously, it's something that needs to be delicately handled, and hopefully, through the process of therapy, uh, healed. But there needs to be an appreciation that most people don't, just like people don't choose to be queer. They are, they have spent a considerable amount of their life um, repressing and pushing down that. And so the importance of creating that safe environment that they can work on unpacking that. Um, the other thing is just be prepared that as you start to work through that unconscious, that repression, there's going to be quite a bit of resistance and defenses that you know, before you can really get to that true self, that inner core. I remember my social worker when I was coming out. At one point, he he was trying to tell me, I know that, you know, with compassion, that God loved me and that God, you know, that God created me as I was. Um, and I remember I stopped him. You know, I can't believe but I said, you know what, um, I love that you're saying that, but you're not actually qualified. Because I've got you know, a master's in theology. And I grew up in a church that has indoctrinated me into believing that God does not love me. And I can't accept that. Like until the theology changes, um, I can't just accept your word for the fact that God loves me. Because I've spent my life believing the opposite. And so it's important not to, you know, to, I guess, stay in your lane and not to try to verge into that uh, the theological discussion or debate, but just appreciate that there's a lot of defenses that are going to, you know, walls that are going to go up as soon as you try to push into that core belief. In terms of treatment for survivors, there is, as far as I know, there's no evidence-based therapeutic intervention for conversion therapy survivors. There are, so you have to be, I would say, don't, that's not a limitation. It just means be really creative. You know, I think the world of psychology is coming around to appreciating religious trauma as a you know, a diagnosis, and helping to understand the trauma that comes from many survivors, or people who have uh, experienced trauma at the hands of religion, and that's a really important area. But just to appreciate the fact that you know, there's really, at this point, you're kind of flying solo when you're working with a conversion therapy, which should be exciting. I mean, that's you know, but there's no modality that says this is what um, you know, that this is how you treat you know, a conversion therapy survivor. I would say the huge part of any treatment has to do with you know, your basic listening and creating this incredibly strong and supportive alliance where the person feels safe to tell their story. Again, checking your own biases that you can ask those, you know, because you're going to encounter internalized homophobia. Every I would say every person who's come out of a religious background and is queer has to some degree internalized homophobia, and that is such a precious and delicate part of them that really can shatter if it's, you know, you don't go in with a sledgehammer. You just create this incredibly safe environment where they can uh, really start to unpack some of those internalized beliefs that cause them to grow up hating a part of themselves, um, and that made it intolerable for them to be queer, to express that part of them, and so they had to bury it, and they had to and they carried so much shame about that part. Um, um, I think another thing is just understanding that often what drives people to conversion therapy is desperation. And so appreciating and respecting that desperation, that uh, it's not that they're necessarily uh, in denial, because they're in an environment that has said there's something wrong with you, um, and you have to fix it before God can love you or before you'll be accepted. Um, and so that creates this desperation, this part of them that will do anything to not be queer. And just appreciating that that desperation has drove them into very self-destructive and very destructive coping mechanisms, uh, namely conversion therapy. And I would say that, my final piece before I kind of open up for questions is, do not, if you can, please try not to assume that you have a therapeutic goal for the client, because chances are you could be very wrong. Your goal may be wonderful to help the person accept themselves, but you need to step back and say, okay, how can I work with this person to understand what their goal is? Because they may have no intentions of leaving the church and have no intentions of accepting uh, themselves. And you've got to kind of live in that tension. And but to assume that you kind of know better, or that that the goal, conversion therapy is ridiculous and is harmful, well, that could add more shame to the person, because they went in good faith, hoping and praying that this was going to work. And so, just appreciating and helping the person themselves establish that goal, so that you become more of a collaborator in helping them to work towards that. And, as we all know, those goals can change. So as the person becomes more and more uh, comfortable in their body and with who they are, that goal of self-acceptance will inevitably take place. But you gotta kind of be patient in terms of working with uh, the person. I was given I was asked to stop around 45 minutes, and I'm really pleased with myself, because I look at my clock and it's 12:45. So there we go. Yeah, I'm open for any questions if anyone has any.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So there is one question that's come out. Can you speak about how you approached your own spirituality now? And for people raising your hands, please put it in the chat. We are in a webinar format, so it has to go through a chat.
Yeah, I think one thing I should say is that I'm currently in therapy with another social worker. I just love social workers. You guys get it in a way that so many people in the mental health field just don't seem to. My spirituality is a work in process. I kind of have moved more to the humanist side of the fence at this point, where I've had to completely step away from religion, because for me, my spirituality is so built around this belief that I'm not acceptable as a gay man, that and that was such a core of my spiritual identity, that I'm still not able to switch over to that. God loves me, God created me as a gay man. And so it's a work in process, as is my therapy. It's just a process of gradually unpacking and working through these really profound traumas in my life, and helping to, I know at some point, I would say one of my goals is to restore my spirituality, because I desperately, I miss God. I miss that that part of my life. But even now, I mean, I feel like there's just so much emotion. There's so much trauma involved um, with God and with uh, religion that I'm still not in a place of being able to move that there.
Thank you so much. There's a question about, there's some love coming at you in the
I
chat.
saw that. Thank
Um,
you. Love right back at you
and
guys. Ooh, let's see there.
and there's also a question about, are there conversion therapy, quote unquote, practices that are not religious based? Um, I don't know if you want to answer that. I'm also happy to.
I I'm I know there is, and I know there are a number of survivors who went through, uh, I think in particular, the, I think our trans community has experienced, because there is no religious language for um, for being trans, at least in my understanding. I mean, and so talk about being alienated. There's nowhere to go. There's no hope if you're trans in a religious environment. And so so often, people have uh, trans people have had to go into the community, into community health. And then all you have to do is look at what's going on in the States with legislation against trans people, and you realize that's, effectively, that's kind of a negative conversion therapy. It's saying, you have no right to exist if you're trans. We're not going to provide any services for you. Your existence is going to be, silenced and canceled. And so, gender affirming care is a core to working with trans population. And so if that is denied to you, then it's, if I can say that, a negative form of conversion therapy. But it took a quite a long time for even the APA to accept homosexuality. So if you think of years of people going to even mental health professionals for help with this, and receiving some kind of a form of conversion therapy to fix that gay part. So I I'm sure, I don't know where it is, now, but I know that, well, I mean, the program that I was involved with, they just changed their name, and they took all the reference to, any conversion therapy off their website, um, and that was part of their way of, of responding to the bill. So it's, I think the question, if the question is, does conversion therapy still exist? I would say yes. And if in terms of ways outside the church that it's practiced, I think, again, from the Western mindset, we may have advanced, uh, but there's a lot of cultures in the world that still would be absolutely fine with practicing conversion therapy.
Thank you. And I do want to say I'm actually aware of at least 2 university programs in the United States that specifically decided to grow their psychology department to focus on conversion therapy practices, quote unquote therapy practices. Even though, listening to Ian's story as well as other survivor stories, we know that such practices actually cause suicidal ideation and self-harm. And so there are some of that. And to Ian's point, the trans community, or the non-binary community in particular, gender diverse, that whole notion of accept your body the way it is. It's a very gray line. Or accept your situation. But you're in a relationship, so accept, and where do we draw that line is very complex. Ian also made a really important point about uh, the importance for social workers who do awesome work and are often the ones that get the structural determinants of health and the ways in which bias is integrated. But it's important for us to refer to spiritual counselors or chaplains who are trained specifically in some of those components, unless we ourselves get the training to deal with adverse religious experiences, which is its own category of specialization. And that is something to do. There's another question here about support available to affected others, partners, loved ones who have people in their lives who are conversion survivors. So I'm going to let Ian answer that, but while Ian's thinking about the answer, in the chat, I put the link to stopconversionpractices.ca, which has a lot of resources for conversion survivors and some of those components as well. But and PFLAG, of course, is always a great resource. But Ian, are there other supports or just ways that you would recommend if, let's say, someone is working with somebody whose loved one is perhaps trapped in a practice like you unfortunately had to endure? What would some resources be for how do you support someone who loves someone who's in that situation?
I think a lot of the same things I said at the beginning is, again, working with that bias and making sure that you understand where that desperation is coming from. Where is that seated? I'm someone who I married, a woman, and engaged in, what many people would say was, it was hypocritical and it was harmful to her. The reality was we had a wonderful marriage. I felt, and not that either of us are perfect, but we had kids, we had a family. To me, it was everything I wanted. Um, but it was a mixed orientation marriage, but it was never allowed to be expressed that way. So, um, yeah, so it's an interesting question. Again, it's just one is so rife with landmines and potential harm. So just I would say be really delicate. There's as far as I know, there's no support groups that focus on spouses or family members or helpers of survivors. So I would say that just if you can include them into your own practice, or refer them to a practice that can help provide that support. I'm not aware at that point, unless Naja's, but
Yeah, so this awakening, this awareness is new, right? The law, the criminalization of this is 2 years old. The anniversary was this past Monday. And we are still beginning to look at this work, looking south of the colonial border at the exact opposite that is happening down there and how that is continuing to increase harm. But it's so complex and nuanced, and we're just beginning to even understand the range of it, the numbers of it, the ways in which it impacts people. Ian spoke powerfully about the unconscious, the mixed feelings, the grief that comes from the loss is another huge issue that is part of coming out in general, but in particular when one has experienced these practices, especially if they are embedded in one's community of faith, because the community of faith piece is the ways we are taught to make meaning of the world oftentimes. And so the extra layers of social support that gets lost, there's so much more to unpack that we can't get to today. But Ian, I hope you got a little bit of the love and appreciation that's coming through the chat. And for those of you that are joining over YouTube, this is why joining live, there's so much rich interaction that happens. But thank you so much. We are so deeply grateful to you for your courage in sharing of your story, in sharing of your vulnerability, and in really inspiring us. And as social workers, we're grateful to know that our profession has something that can be healing to others, especially in this area, in addition to our advocacy.
Can I just say,
Please.
if I would be happy to, like if you've written out a question or if you've got some comment, I don't know how to receive those, but Naj, if you want to
Yes.
pass those on to me, I'm happy to respond to any questions and make myself available if anyone wants to further the discussion or conversation. If that's allowed, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, totally.
You know,
Thank you
kind of
for that.
my passion is to now be part of the solution and supporting other people who are out there on the front lines.
Thank you for your willingness to do that. I put my email in the chat so people can contact me if they have additional questions for Ian. And you can also learn more about Ian's story in the Legal Information Society of Nova Scotia's Free to Be Me guide, where he was featured, as actually I was as well. And that was one of the ways that we first met. So with that, thank you all. And if you are watching this and you are aware or you've experienced harm, it's important to know that if you are in Canada, you can contact the regulatory body of if it's, for example, a social worker or a therapist or any kind of psychologist, any kind of registered mental health professional or health professional more broadly, you can make a complaint about that. That is why we exist, to protect the public. So know that that is an option. There have not been yet any cases that have been tried in court about some of the ways in which this might manifest in non-registered counseling professions, like clergy, for example, in faith communities, which we know is one of the places where it disproportionately happens thus far. So we are still at a very pivotal time. It's a historic time. This is a historic lunch and learn, in fact, especially, and for those of you on the south side of the colonial border, it is possible. Keep advocating, because look what we have achieved. And together we can hopefully make for a world where all humans are able to live true to who they were created to be. Thank you so much to everyone for all of the beautiful comments and the love that's flowing in. And Ian, thank you so much for your courage and sharing your story and helping us understand the depths and the complexity of this issue. For many of us, it may be the first time we're even hearing the term and are unfamiliar with it. So thank you for helping us unpack this, because it is the law. It is illegal to do. And the challenge is we may not know that we're doing it because of our own unconscious bias. And that's why unlearning all of our unconscious bias is an ethical mandate that our new code of ethics is requiring us to do. So thank you for helping us do that.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll allow you.